Welcome everyone to the session of Designing for PoE Lighting and Automation, where top design professionals and subject matter experts with experience in designing and constructing Power over Ethernet intelligent buildings share their best practices and lessons learned. This session will introduce you to the new roles and responsibilities you should expect in your PoE intelligent building project. Through this and the future sessions, you will gain crucial skills and knowledge essential to delivering better intelligent buildings for developers and owners. So, if you haven't already done so, please click on the link that I'm going to drop in the chat line in just a second for the sessions. The next session will be hosted by Larry Jones with Baird Hampton Brown, who were the lighting designers at the Sinclair Marriott, and will cover the new stages of design and construction you need to expect in your PoE intelligent building project, from design through construction all the way into operations. So just a reminder, if this is the first time you're joining us, I am excited to announce that we have expanded our series to a 7 online session course hosted each week for the next month. So make sure to register for them all to get the absolute best advice on PoE lighting and automation. Now, if you missed the 2 sessions, go back and watch them at the links I'll also drop in the chat line. These are invaluable sessions for the best practices, and the content, you can't pay for it. There is no price you can pay. So register to make sure you can have your place at the next sessions. Seating is limited. So without further ado, let's introduce our speaker today. Hannah Walker is the Vice President of Sinclair Digital LLC, a low voltage design consulting company for digital buildings. Mrs. Walker graduated Texas A&M with an architectural degree in 2017, then joined Sinclair Holdings to help design and implement the smart building technology at the Sinclair Hotel, which was completed in January of 2020. It is the most diverse PoE powered building in the world. Professionally, she's retained her CCNA and RCDD certifications and has been using both her networking and architectural degrees to design and develop smart building spaces and infrastructure. So with that, let's turn the time over to Mrs. Hannah Walker, her presentation.
Hi, thank you, Tyler. It's good to be here. Good to participate on this panel and discuss a little bit more about PoE and all the exciting opportunities and possibilities of it. So with that, I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Great. So we're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities of all the different parties involved when you're starting to design and implement a PoE digital building. You heard a little bit about me a second ago. I got my bachelor degree of architecture from Texas A&M, and I've just been working with the Sinclair team since then. We have worked on PoE since 2016, we had an office building here. We have 3 floors. We have a CVS on our first floor. And then of course the Sinclair Hotel, which is kind of our showcase project, which has all PoE lighting, window treatments, mini bars, and smart mirrors in the project, all run by digital building switches and volt server power. So we've been working in this kind of design low voltage space for a while, and now we are even starting to consult and design other projects that are not our own. So one thing that is a big, obviously, difference when you're transitioning from AC to DC, and this shift is really starting to happen in a lot of fields other than PoE. People are more interested in renewable. The technology of renewable energy has been increasing, tenfold. Battery storage is increasing tenfold, and all of these are inherent DC powered things. And so now that we're transitioning other things in the building to being powered by DC, like lighting, other kind of motors and devices, all these things are starting to fall in place, and they're all kind of changing at the same timeline and kind of making the same moment in time now. One thing that is important when deciding that you want to do a PoE project is, who is the customer? And there is going to be a lot of disagreements with, we want to go PoE or we don't want to go PoE. So you need to figure out who is going to be the one that's going to champion your technology, whether it's the developer, whether it's somebody that is interested in sustainability, whether it's the cost people, but everybody is going to be affected in this way differently. So it's your job to figure out who's going to be the champion of this technology that you can really sell, and who's the decision maker. Because especially in other projects where it gets a lot more convoluted, like school systems, they are run by a board of people. And an entire board having to make this huge change to PoE can be pretty tricky. So you really need to look and try to find who's the key decision maker, and just start to think about how some people are maybe averse to it, and they don't want to try to step into a new thing, and try to identify where all of that lies. So the key players, there are a lot of people involved, as I mentioned earlier, with transitioning PoE devices from AC to low voltage DC devices. But the ones that I think that are affected the absolute most are these four that you see here: the electrical engineer, the low voltage designer, the lighting designer, and then the installers, whether that's going to be an electrician or a low voltage installer. So I'm going to take you through the phases, the four phases, very simplified version of a construction project, and where each of these roles that we talked about in the earlier slide are going to come in, and where their roles are going to be changing. So one of the biggest issue that comes when you transition from high voltage AC lighting to low voltage lighting is that you're changing from a life safety system, when traditional low voltage technology does not necessarily have to do with life safety, like internet, phone systems. A lot of phone systems with hotels do have to be backed up by emergency power, but it's different than having to adhere to all of the codes and compliances that an AC system would have to do. And that's something that low voltage designers are not going to be familiar with. And so this is something you really need to keep in mind if you're a low voltage designer and you're going to go design a lighting system, because there are codes that you need to follow now. And there's some codes listed that you see on the screen that you need to keep in mind. I'm not going to go really in detail to each of them, but those are some codes that you can reference. Realize that it's going to be a lot more in depth than just designing a traditional access point network or a traditional phone network, because they are life safety systems now, not just amenities for the people in the building. Another big issue that you're going to come across in pre-design is you need to get your AHJ on board with what you're doing. As we talked about in the last slide, because there are codes and rules you have to follow, there are also going to be inspectors and other people that you need to give information to, so that when they're checking over the systems, that they are aware that what you're doing. And when we were in Fort Worth, which is where we did the Sinclair building, and we were going to approach the cities that we want to do PoE lighting, one thing that was particularly an issue was in the Fort Worth code, electrical code, it says that light fixtures need to be installed by an electrician. And so that is a direct conflict with the idea of a low voltage installer can put this in, it costs less to install, things like that. So we went to the city and we held a meeting with them, and we said, we had an IP phone plugged in, and it was plugged in. Obviously, an electrician would need to install that. And we unplugged the phone and we plugged it into a lighting driver, and the lights came on. And with that demonstration and with other communication we did showing that we're still adhering to all the codes, they were able to say, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why would an electrician need to install that phone? Thus, they shouldn't really need to install the lights. And so those are the kind of conversations that you need to have. And it's very important to have those early on, because the last thing you want to do is get far into the design only to have the city, because maybe they feel like they're being forced into a decision, shut you down, or not want to work with you. And so finding who is going to be the inspectors who are going to be the people making the decisions at the city level is very important to having a successful project. In the pre-design phase, you need to come up with design rules. So there are some larger factors that are going to affect cost, budget, pricing, and those are kind of larger design decisions that I think are going to be talked about a little bit later in the sequence presentations. But some of them are, are you going to use constant current or constant voltage lighting? Which lighting company, driver company you're going to use, because depending on what driver company you're going to use, it could be a wildly different design. How do we want the network? Do we want it centralized? Do we want it decentralized? Which of these which of these lighting drivers are compatible with what sensors, based on what I want as a client? And then also, you're going to have certain wattage limitations by which network switches you use, which lights you use. And so these are kind of basic design rules that you want to set as early on as you can for the help of the lighting designer and the electrical engineer and the lighting procurement as well, to do their jobs effectively by understanding the limitations and the design rules that you set to make the whole system successful. Because you don't want, obviously, your system, you're designing it with all constant voltage lighting, but then you have your lighting designer, they're choosing fixtures that are constant current, and then your procurement, manager is buying constant current lights, and then, nothing ends up working. That's something that you really need to set early on in the design rules so that everybody can be on the same page with what the design is going to be. So now we're going to move into the design phase. So obviously now we're going to get to drawings. So this, I broke down some categories, and this is kind of a similar categories to what we had at the Sinclair project, but there can be some shifting of all of these. Obviously the lighting designer, like Larry Jones, he's a lighting designer and electrical engineer. So those two, could be shared with one company. So these things can move and shift, but these are kind of just standard, typical drawings that each of these categories would need. So the lighting designer is going to, design the light levels in the space, how they want it to look. They're going to coordinate with the architectural drawings, and they're going to identify the look and feel of the fixtures, the specs on the fixtures, what they want it to be, and they might take a light that they like and say, we just need this type of light, this look, but we need it in PoE. And that's the selection of the fixtures. And then the electrical engineer is going to take, they're going to basically do the emergency lighting. So stairway lights, exit lights, because those set of lighting do need to be submitted for permitting. The other lights, the decorative lights, things like that, those don't need to be permitted. But the emergency lights, we mentioned this before, it's a life safety system, they do need to be permitted. So, and I've also heard from another low voltage designer that they were able to permit drawings for emergency lighting. So it just depends on your AHJ, but typically electrical engineer would do this. And so it's always, if they're willing to work with you and cooperate in the project, then they can place the emergency lighting and submit it to get the permits that you need. And then the electrical engineer is also going to be important to be able to put power where you need it for your distribution switches, whether you're using volt server, whether you're using AC power to your switches, you need to make sure you're coordinating with them so the power is where it needs to be when you need it. And then they're also going to be coordinating the conduit paths. That wouldn't be something that's typically done by your low voltage designer. So you need to make sure that whatever pathways you need, the electrical engineer is understanding that they need to show that in their drawings for your systems. And then the low voltage designer is now going to take the lighting design from the electrical engineer and the lighting designer and overlay the systems on it. They're going to say, we need these nodes, we need this many switches, we're going to show this is how these are all wired to get the effect we want. And then they're going to be responsible for producing wiring drawings and then making sure all the systems are compatible. So these are three of the things that I feel are the top things to consider when you're designing a low voltage lighting system. Budget is number one. So we mentioned it earlier when we were talking in the panel discussion. With PoE devices and lighting, there are so many things you can do. You can add sensors, you can add intelligence, you can add automation, you can add scheduling. And because there's so many options, if they can become very expensive. And in comparison to having to run control wires and, you know, maybe control 4 panels and dimming and Lutron panels everywhere, it can be cost competitive. But if that's not what the owner was intending in the first place and they wanted something more simple, then you need to understand the budget limitations and what you can provide for the budget that they're thinking. And the network design is a large part of that. If you're going to go from centralized or decentralized, those are very, very different, and there are going to be pros and cons to both. And if you are unaware or unsure of which one you want to do, that's going to affect every single design item in your entire project. How your node count, your switch count, your placement. So that's something that you really have to decide on very early, and that's going to affect the budget in a lot of ways. And then the last thing is you need to be aware that there's recurring costs associated with a lot of these smart features. If you have sensors that are providing you a service that's recurring, you probably will have a recurring cost associated to that. If you have specialized automation, there's probably going to be a recurring cost. So if you don't think about that early on, that could be something very unpleasant conversation to have with the ownership at a later date. When you tell them, by the way, also now you have to pay an extra $600 a month for warranties, for support, and XYZ. So be aware that if you're switching from a kind of a dumb system to a smart system, just as if you would pay somebody like Guest Tech or somebody like 14IP to manage your phones, they have a monthly cost. These kind of systems will probably also have a monthly cost that you need to be aware of, and you need to make sure your owner team is aware of that as well. So I put this in the low voltage design section because there's a difference between installation drawings and then operational drawings. So if you're going to be balancing lights, shade windows, you know, multiple PoE devices like something we have at Sinclair, then you need to make sure that you're understanding how the network works and how that can be operated and maintained at a later date. So you're going to have a set of operational drawings, and you're going to have a set of installation drawings. And the installation drawings are going to be a lot more specific with wiring details, but it's going to be limited to the room type. You're obviously not going to do the exact same wiring drawing for, you know, 100 rooms that are all the same room type. Whereas the operational drawings that you're going to do, they actually will be every single room. What is every single room's, you know, the IP addresses? What is its, if you're going to do VLANs, if you're going to do zones, you actually will have to go through every room and produce the drawings for that as well. So you really need to have both of these drawings completed before the installation, because you're able to then pre-program your devices with your standardized naming and everything that you came up with in your design. So now if we jump into the construction phase, this is obviously an important phase. If you can do all the design in the world, but if you don't have an installer that knows what they're doing, it can all, you know, just go up in smoke. So there's some key people here that are involved in the building process that will be very important to integrate with when you're on the job site. Obviously, even though you won't be designing with the general contractor, you have to coordinate with them, because typically how it's handled is an owner is going to subcontract a low voltage consultant or a designer separately from the general contractor. So what that means is that he's not necessarily going to put you in the subcontracting meetings because he's not in charge of you. You contracted directly with the owner. And so you need to make sure that you're on the same page with the GC, you're there with their schedule, you're meeting all their schedule needs, because as far as just coming in later to do, you know, cameras and access points, you're going to be coming much earlier in to really be on track with MEP rough-ins and things like that to make sure that all of your life safety and lighting systems are going in when they need to. So here's just a kind of a comparison between things that might shift from an electrician installing it to shifting down to a low voltage installer installing it. And I kind of put for electricians a reduction / shift of scope, because they are reducing some scope, but in a lot of areas they're adding scope as well. So obviously they're still doing hard metal conduit, they're still doing any high voltage power supplies, anything that is resulting from high voltage power. They're still going to be doing your distribution, high voltage distribution, and then there are a lot of features that are becoming more and more common. Battery backup systems, they'll have to wire those. Solar power installations, they'll have to provide power for those. So it's kind of shifting to these more sustainable practices, but there will be certain reductions as far as, they won't be handling lighting install. They won't be handling lighting circuits, things like that. And so that's where I marked on the bottom, you have the low voltage installer is going to be doing the lighting wiring. They're going to be installing every light fixture, and they're going to be installing, flex conduit for that. And they're going to be really trying to install as much as possible. If it's low voltage, they handle it. If it's high voltage, the electricians handle it. And this is a big issue that you will have to resolve with your AHJ. Ideally, this is what we would like to see, but if you might have to make concessions in your local area with the situation that you're dealing with your AHJ, and if there's potentially already a contract involved with the electrician and the owner, you're just going to have to make those decisions as each project comes. Here's a little bit of sequencing I did just so you can kind of get in your mind where they would come in. So obviously you're going to have the framing, and then you're going to have the conduit that needs to go in. We like to install flex conduit behind a lot of our systems because we don't want to have, if there's ever a change, every time you have sheetrock, there's a change, you got to go cut it, fix it, patch it. It's a lot of work. So we like to install, a flex Smurf conduit behind the wall to be able to change cables quickly and things like that. So you're going to be in there right when the electrical MEP rough-in is going on, the electrical boxes, the cut-in rings, and then right when all that's done, before the sheetrock goes up, you're going to want to put the wiring in there because it becomes much harder to wire if you don't have access to anything in the wall. We did that at Sinclair where we were like, okay, we're going to put the conduit in, and then we're going to go sheetrock, and then we're going to do the wiring. But what happens in the field is that all the other contractors, they don't care at all about your installation. So if they see a Smurf tube in their way, they'll just rip it over and take it off, whatever, and they'll put their stuff where it needs to be. So if you can't see in the walls, then it can become very difficult to put the wiring in because it may or may not be how it was when you installed it. And that's also when you're going to be putting in the powered switches. And this is another area that you have to consider. Typically, you wouldn't put in a piece of technology equipment in a non-clean, environment. You wouldn't put it in when there's, drywall and paint going in. But you have to do that because per the electrical inspections, you need to get those lights on so that the painters can paint. If you don't have lights, then how are people going to be painting? So you have to figure out where's the best place to put this switching equipment, where it's going to be protected, kept in a good location. And then you can kind of, see where the rest of it goes. The low voltage installers have to come back. Typically there's lights in a hospitality environment on the furniture. So you might have to go, you can do the architectural lights, they can do the furniture, then you're going to have to come back. So you really have to be dynamic in your coordination with all the other trades. I kind of mentioned these are kind of happening at the same time. You've got the flex conduit, the cut-in boxes, the MEP rough-ins. And then on number 9, I was saying, you might have to do architectural one place, come back, do the decorative. You can't just plan to go in there and do them all. If you have a really nice pendant, you can't put that in when there's still installers and contractors in there. And then I put a little symbol by each of these phases. So it would be ideal to get the maintenance team and the people that are going to be working with this in the operations team to understand the way that the conduits run, to understand the way the wires run, because they're going to be maintaining these things after the fact. And if they have no idea how it was run, how the conduit is, then it makes it much more difficult for them to maintain it properly. And especially number 12 in the commissioning phase, it's very important to, at that time, start the training. So in later dates, if they need to commission something, then they understand it, they get it because they've already done it. And then last but not least, we'll go into operations. And we're not going to go really deep into this because there's a whole presentation that's really fantastic on this. but I wanted to mention some key things because this is a big part of the roles of IT and maintenance that are changing drastically. And so we would like to think that for putting all this network equipment in, IT will manage this. But we have found that that's really not the case. Typical IT departments don't want to be involved in changing a light or troubleshooting wiring. That is not something they're interested in. They're interested in is troubleshooting the network. And if somebody can't get their printer to work, that stuff they're interested in. So no offense to anybody that is on the IT side, but the things you're going to have to think about is the IT departments are going to have to become more flexible. IT loves to have all of their equipment in one rack because it's accessible to them. It's all there. It's a lot, very secure because you have, access control and things like that. And when we're now buying, hundreds of more potentially switches, then where is that budget going to go? Is that going to be where we buy all the other switches, which is IT budget? Or is it going to shift to another department? So you need to be flexible with the IT, understanding that smart building technology that's about power and efficiency and sustainability may not be the best approach to a traditional IT network deployment. And then the maintenance guy, they're really going to have to step up their game as far as newer skills. It's not just going to be fixing the door, it's not going to be need to retouch this with paint, things like that. You're really going to have to learn troubleshooting skills on a network. And this is something we've implemented at Sinclair. And we have found that the maintenance staff is actually, very excited about learning the training because they see it as this new opportunity, new technology for them. But, you're going to have to get probably laptops for them. It's not always going to be take your drill, take your ladder, go fix it. It might be, let's grab our laptop, let's troubleshoot this. And so it's almost critical that maintenance people need that networking 101 to be able to maintain, a sophisticated system like this. And it's really about working together. And it's difficult, lack of cooperation is going to lead to conflict, and it's not going to be a successful project if the IT and the OT are really kind of fighting, whether it's budgets, maybe it's security standards. Typically, OT security would be, I need to make sure the door locks are working or things like that, or I need a security guard. Whereas IT security, they're thinking about a lot more things. They're thinking about resiliency and people potentially hacking. And so you need to kind of come together and decide those things early on. This is another slide that just kind of talks about, shows, IT's focusing on, computer storage, data, where OT would be, usually separate. But now with this convergence, you're seeing that these things are really interlocking and they're really having to work together more than they have before. So just some final takeaways. It really takes a team. And so being aware of the different roles and how roles are shifting and how things are changing is very important. But no team is going to function. I've seen a lot of projects fail because certain team members were not as enthusiastic or were kind of pushing back about a lot of the changes. And so getting the team early on and getting everybody on board with the vision of the project, sustainability, efficiency, sustainable living. There's so many benefits, customization, that you just want to kind of get the whole team on board for the vision of the project. And then big takeaway, be aware of code compliance issues that you might run into. That will make or break a project. If you need UL 924 on your nodes, you need to make sure you get a UL node with 924. If you need a certain rating, you need to make sure that you're adhering to the codes, the National Electric Code and other codes that are going to be affected. And then, budgets are going to be a huge thing. Don't envy everybody that has to address their budget. Everyone's going to have to do it, but taking, budgets away from certain people and putting it other places, that's always fun experience to go through. So that's something that definitely will need to be addressed. And then the convergence of IT and OT is going to be huge when we're talking about the roles and how do we maintain this. We've built this great project. and how do we maintain it? So there's going to be a convergence there, and just understanding the new roles is going to be very important. So that's everything. So thank you.
Fantastic, Hannah. That's a great presentation. I love seeing it, and we do have some very good and interesting questions. So, ladies and gentlemen of the attendees, go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A. If you want, chat them, but Hannah will be now answering a few very interesting questions. So, Hannah, James would like to take us back to the pre-design phase. He asks, would you consider occupant performance / business outcomes as part of pre-design? And I think he tried to clarify it, engaging the C-suite early to build up a passion for it.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a huge, in general, I already assumed, if you're in the project, then somebody had this idea of what they want to achieve in the project, but that's usually what gets you in the project. So I think I kind of associated that, prior to this presentation, but it is very important to showcase all the benefits of the technology and understand what they want specifically. Like you're saying, customer experience, is this really important to you? Even customer experience as far as contactless experience. Hilton that I'm working with is very, is very aware that the guest doesn't want to touch, the same thing 100 people have touched to. So how can PoE, begin to solve these problems? How can we use this technology to create a better guest experience? And that's definitely something, like you're saying, that you need to get with that C-level staff and make it a priority and make it something that they want to focus on, because there are a lot of these hot topics right now, health and safety, that PoE can potentially solve that problem, which can be a huge selling point.
Fantastic. James would also like to know, now that you're in the construction phase, are low voltage installers getting special training or credentials that certifies them to install items above the heads of occupants in a safe way? And I think he's thinking about are low voltage installers getting trained or certified on installing lighting. What's your experience with that in terms of qualification of low voltage installers?
Well, for the lighting, it just varies from contractor to contractor. I would definitely make sure that the lighting installer is very familiar with, especially when you get into really decorative fixtures that are a little bit more difficult to install, that they're aware and they've done model rooms and mock-ups of those light fixtures. Unfortunately, I don't know of specific training programs or certifications that they can receive to say that, yes, I can install any light, or if it's just that they're comfortable in doing it. And I also know that a lot of electrical companies and low voltage companies are the same company, and that they can sometimes use that training where their electricians will typically install lights, and maybe using similar people but at a lower cost to install fixtures. So using people that are familiar already. But as far as overhead things, I know that low voltage installers install cameras and things like that all the time, but you're right, when you get into the decorative fixtures, it definitely is a different skill set, and it's something that each low voltage installation company needs to look into a little bit more. And how do we ensure that we have the expertise to install all these decorative lights?
Great answers. I think spot on. James would also like to know, during the pre-design phase, what about preparing for integration with smart building management systems or sustainable power systems? What are you finding in the pre-design work where people discuss that, and how do you implement it?
Well, as far as building automation goes, if you're talking about lighting and all the PoE features, a lot of the driver companies are going to have really fantastic options for automation and scheduling and producing a system that can handle a lot of those kind of BMS features built in already, which is fantastic. We work with several lighting driver companies, and they all have some kind of system where you can set up scheduling and to produce efficiency, and then those companies are now integrating with other companies such as LG and lighting driver companies, where now they can communicate directly and say, okay, when my occupancy sensor that's connected to my driver doesn't see anything, then I can send a notification message to the LG system, and they can now turn their air conditioning to a certain set temperature. So it's definitely something you want to talk about in pre-design as well, like you're saying, and identify what's the goal. Is the goal efficiency? And if the goal is efficiency, who are my partners, or what partners should I be choosing to allow that efficiency? Is the mechanical company that we're working with going to be able to communicate with my lighting company? And if they're not, maybe that's a decision that you have to make another choice there. But it's definitely easier to have that communication when it's all on a network. But we haven't, as far as one VMS that can do all these things, it doesn't, there's no IP-based VMS today. So it is still being handled, company to company, interacting with each other, getting the kind of VMS system coordinated by yourself. But we are trying to develop a VMS that can be all IP based and allow for that advanced coordination, make it a lot easier than maybe what it is right now.
Hannah, if you can hear me, I've lost my input audio, so I'm going to try and read your lips here while you're talking. But if you guys can't hear Hannah, please shoot me a chat. It may just be me, but I'll keep asking these fantastic questions that people have brought up. James would also like to know, what are the documents called that are used to validate a fully commissioned system matches what the customer expects? That's a great question. So Hannah, what documents should they be looking for?
Well, when you first design a project, that you're going to want to come up with a project narrative that you'll give to the owner that says, this is the whole project, this is the scope of the project, this is how we're going to do it, and these are the features that are going to be involved. So having that in physical documentation is very important, because like you're saying, there are a lot of features that could be added, shifted, removed, and how do you know that you have all those systems? So once you have that narrative that you come up with, it's also very important because you're going to need to submit this to the AHJ. You're going to need to submit it to, if you're working in a hotel, you're going to need to submit it to your brand, Hilton, Marriott, etc. But now that you have that it's set in stone, kind of, at the end of the project, you're going to do what is kind of like a final walkthrough, final can't think of the word, but you're basically going to do a final walkthrough and sign off with the owner representative that you will check off those things that you've listed and say, and you're going to do a training for each of those systems. So you're going to say, this is the lighting system, this is how it does, the scheduling, the automation, everything, X, Y, Z. And you're going to train the staff there, and then they'll check it off, say, yes, this is complete. So it's just a system of, from the identification and the narrative, and then following it through all the way to the sign off. It will all be connected that way. Are you there, Tyler? I can't hear anymore.
All right, great, thank you. So Hannah, the next question is, Donnie would like to know, did electrical or LV install the digital electricity? And does Volt server power anything other than the PoE switches?
I don't know if anybody else got that, but you're ramping through that. It was like double time fast audio. Anyway, with the Volt server, it is a component that is both high voltage and low voltage. So as far as connecting the Volt server to AC power, and for the first round of Volt server that we put in, we have dedicated circuit panels that fed the Volt server directly. So there's a whole circuit panel that's dedicated to feeding the Volt server. So obviously having the circuit panel, wiring it to the Volt server transmitter shelves. And if you haven't familiar with Volt server, feel free to message me and I can explain more about Volt server. But you're gonna wire it directly to the transmitter shelves, and that's where the AC power, that's where the electricians stop. from there, from the front of the transmitters through the building to the receivers, it's all class 2 power that's run on 18-gauge cable. And so you can take it all the way to the receiver, which is connected directly to your networking switches. And those are going to be either hardwired or connected with cables, something that you can just plug in like a power cable. So from the front of the transmitter all the way to the receiver, which can be up to 2 miles away with no power loss, it's all low voltage installer at that point.
Okay, excellent. Next question. Jose would like to know, who do you try to approach first in a project like this? The CEO, the IT, the facilities, the sustainability representative, or the CFO?
So the person that you want to approach is the owner or the developer, because they're the ones that are going to decide the direction that they want their project to take. It's going to be more difficult for somebody on their IT team or somebody on their CFO team to get them involved, because they may not be the final decision maker. And there are going to be a lot of potential risks as far as this is a newer technology. And so that's something that you need to convince the owner of directly and the developer. Another angle that I would personally take is, as being someone that does design and install these systems, if you're a product or if you're a company that produces a product that you would like to get into the system, then you need to try to partner with one of these design companies, because a lot of times with Sinclair, from our side, as a hospitality project, it's also a Marriott project that we had to go through a lot of rigorous life safety tests and things like that and standards. We have a lot of developers come and visit us to see this system, because it is something that they haven't seen before and they want to understand how it works. And so, but we don't seem to really get anywhere when lower staff get involved. It really has to be the owner or the developer, or else it's a lot more difficult to make the sale for us, is what we found. But the owners that come to us, things that they're interested in, sustainability. We have a project that we're working on right now that they wanted to have passive house lead, and it's an older building that they're working with, and so they were kind of maybe struggling to get the energy efficiency they needed, and this gave them that energy efficiency. And I think if there's somebody in the company that is trying to look for health and safety features, I think this would be a great time to try to integrate PoE, because you can maybe do the UVC lights, you can do UVC in the VRF systems. So I would say that those are the people that you want to convince.
Okay, excellent. Well, Matthew would like to know your opinion on and Matthew, I might ask you to clarify your question again. I'm not sure I'm understanding it. He's asking about, what about Igor IP-based? Your opinion on the system versus existing automation. Matthew, can you clarify your question for us again? And we'll come back to that. Hannah, now this is an interesting question from an anonymous attendee. Are you running into any challenges with lighting designers on projects and getting them to approve fixtures?
So we are, in our first project that we did, we worked with Larry from BHB, and we also worked with the interior designer for the the look of the fixtures. And so both of them, were very flexible as long as it matched the look. That was the main concern for the interior designer. And from the lighting designer, they were just BHB was a lot more flexible with allowing, as the ownership, we were the owners, so it was kind of like we just put in what we wanted, But in other projects that I'm working on, it can be difficult to coordinate with lighting designers, and one reason is because there aren't, in the AC lighting world, there are hundreds and hundreds of manufacturers out there, and there are wide range of pricing and a wide range of quality. And so a lighting designing company that I've my experience has been, they have specific, very, very specific manufacturers that they like and they use. And that's because they know the quality is there. They know the system is going to be great and it's going to last a long time. So that's the struggle, is that a lot of the newer lighting manufacturers that we're working with, they don't have the familiarity with the lighting design company. So the things that we have done to help them feel more comfortable, they'll give us a set of specs, and we will take that to the manufacturers that do PoE lighting for us. And we say we need these specs to match or be comparable. And so they'll do like side-by-side specification comparisons to make sure the specs are the exact same. And then as far as the picture quality, we try to get samples of these lights, and then we'll ship them to the lighting designer so they can test it, get a feel for it, and then at that point is typically when they approve it. So you have to work with them very carefully and let them do the test, because on their side, they don't know the quality of these manufacturers and they aren't used to working with them. But there are great PoE manufacturers out there, and I have no doubt that if they make a fixture, then it's going to be comparable to something the lighting designer would choose. And if not, you always need to be aware that the lighting designer is not paying for the system, they're not paying for the fixtures. And so at the end of the day, the owner is going to make the decision. And if you have a light that is a nice quality light, may not be the designer light, then the owner makes the decision which one he's going to pay for, and not the lighting designer. So I would say work with them as best you can and try to be as matching as possible with all your specs. And then at the end of the day, if they still don't approve it, you need to go to the one step above them, whoever's writing the paycheck.
Very good suggestions. This is all great information. Well, Hannah, Matthew did come back and he mentioned, you had said there's no IP-based automation system, but he's asking if you're familiar with Igor. So I think he's looking for your experience with IP-based automation systems.
Yeah, and I might have misspoke. I meant there is no fully IP-based BMS, fully realized BMS system that communicates with all its endpoints in IP. We do work with Igor, and they are IP-based, and they do have a really great control system within the software, and that software can then be connected to other systems like HVAC and other things like that, and it is all IP-based. But for right now, our connection we have an Igor lighting system, and then maybe we're connecting with an LG air conditioning system. That is still a backnet communication, because LG has not been able to produce products yet that are IP-based communication. So those are kind of things that we're still working on, is getting all of our vendors to have IP-based products so that we can have a true IP-based BMS, and not something that, some things are IP, some things are backnet. It can definitely be done and needs to be done at this time, because you're not going to have the full range of products that you need. But as far as the Igor product, it's a great product. They have great online software, very easy to configure, very easy for ownership teams. So they have an excellent, scheduling and maintenance kind of platform that they have. So as far as an IP-based system, I would say that they're probably one of the leaders with, PoE lighting technology right now.
Great, great. So James wants to come back to the question of life after sign-off. So to set expectations correctly for what happens after commissioning and startup, what training and documentation is used for daily life, or he's saying continuous commissioning checks and emergency system testing?
So emergency system testing is based on codes. I know that Marriott required us to do life safety test every year to make sure that systems are still functioning, and they'll come by, randomly to check, are all your emergency lights, on? Are there exit signs that are off? Why are they off? So that's going to be regulated by the code set that you live in and what they require to make sure that life safety systems are functioning, as they should at all times. As far as standard maintenance, a lot of the systems that we're working with have started to come up with notification systems, where if there's a fault or a short circuit or something like that, then they can send, via their IP system, notifications to via text message or email to the maintenance staff, which is very helpful with troubleshooting things before even a guest understands that there's something wrong. But we also have kind of checklists that we make for every room that we have the housekeepers do. So when they walk in, is our touch screen working? Is the touchscreen shower working? Do the shades, are they opening and closing as they should with the scenes? And we make them run through that checklist so that we don't put a guest in a room where there is an incident. And it could be simple, like as simple as, you know, a wire. We have, you know, a Somfy window treatment system, which is awesome. But sometimes when the housekeepers are cleaning, or, you know, something happens, you know, a guest might, you know, tug too hard and maybe push a wire. It could come, you know, slightly unplugged. So it could be something really simple like that. But having a checklist that you go through every time someone checks in to make sure that it's functioning is pretty important, because little things can happen here and there. And then coupling that with the software letting you know when there's a specific issue is extremely helpful. Otherwise, you know, it's gonna be based on complaints, which is never really what you want to base it on. So trying to catch it at a time is very important.
Excellent. Excellent. Michael would like to know, how do you approach coordination with the architect and the associated pushback for cabling, pathways, cable tray, routing, terminations in an exposed ceiling deck scenario?
We haven't done an exposed ceiling scenario, unfortunately, just because our projects have been historic projects, and if they have rules, like if it was originally a public space that had a covered ceiling, then you can't have a public space that doesn't have a covered ceiling. So those are kind of a lot of the things that we've dealt with. But I think as far as coordination with the architect, we obviously have dealt with things like that and other coordination items. And so you want to be involved as soon as humanly possible to start coordinating with the engineers and the architects, so that you can really feel like a team member with them and always keeping them up to speed. Some projects will require BIM modeling. So if that's the case, then it's probably a lot easier to coordinate, because everyone's putting their information into a model and you can see where it conflicts and where it doesn't. But it's very important, like you're saying, if there's going to be an exposed ceiling, that you are right in there with the design phase, with the ceiling design, you know, saying this is what we can do and what we can't do, or else, you know, you could have conflicts, or it could end up, you know, looking like a mess.
Mm-hmm. And then on that same issue, James would like to know, what rules of thumb are you using to help an owner future-proof their system? And he's thinking reserve some power per PoE port for possible use later, saving some ports, running extra low voltage cable while the walls are open and it's more affordable to install cables. How do you navigate that conversation?
That's a really good point to bring up. One thing we did, I mentioned earlier, we typically do the flex conduit behind the walls, because if you have, in our hospitality project we're working on right now, 15 drops a room, you know, for all the decorative lights that are hanging out in the guest room. If you ever have to maintain that later, it's a mess to start cutting those walls up. I mean, it's not something you want to do. So having that conduit backbone, you know, something flex, something cheaper, you can just fish wires in and out quickly. I think that is essential if you want to avoid future problems. We don't typically run extra wires. There are things that we do run extra wires for, namely our volt server system, where the power's traveling along a pair of cables. We always like to have a spare set of cables, so that if you have to add power later, I can add another switch right onto that second pair set without having to rerun wires. So on the power side, I do think that that's important to think about, is maybe if I want to add something later, do I have the space? And along those same lines, we do typically like, depending on, you know, the size of your switches, if we have an 8-port switch, we typically like to leave 1 or 2 ports open for expansion and future use. At some point, you know, you can't leave half of them open. You're not being efficient at that stage, where you could then, you know, put 2 rooms on one switch. But we do like to as kind of a rule, if it's an 8-port switch, leave 1 or 2 open for expansion. And then if there's like a major change, you know, you can always add another switch because you have that extra pair there with your volt server cable. So that's what my rules of thumb for that.
Right. Well, we have one last question, Hannah, and we have just enough time for it. An anonymous attendee would like to know, do you know if there's a smart shower system that has an open API?
So even the shower system that we use right now, which is the Kohler DTV, it's still AC powered, even though it uses very minimal power systems. And then, you know, there's a large valve in the ceiling of the bathrooms that is hardwired to the AC system. So as far as other shower systems we haven't worked with, we've only worked with the Kohler DTV shower. So I don't have as much information on that one as I probably would like to.
Okay. Well, Hannah, you have done an amazing job presenting today. I am totally impressed by the presentation. I'm also really grateful for the great questions that the audience has put out there. You are truly taking advantage of a great moment to talk to somebody who's an expert in the field with a lot of experience. So thank you very much. And Hannah, I can tell you as a project manager for owners in my past lives, the crucial success indicator is really that you have the right roles and people defined and doing the right things from a project from the very beginning. So thank you very much for that presentation. If you would like, Hannah has also very graciously offered to share her email address, which I'm putting right here. If you'd like to reach out and ask Hannah any questions, you can reach out to her directly. You can also respond to the poll that comes at the end of the presentation. You can also reach out to the moderator at the Intelligent Building Resource Center for any questions you may have. So don't forget to register for the future training sessions. So get on the links, join those. Seating is limited, so make sure you can attend. Thank you again, Hannah. If you, for all of you out there, go ahead and give her a shout out on the chat. Thank her very much for her time. And we will see you next Wednesday when Larry's going to be talking about the new stages of design and construction. Thank you very much.